Loch Rannoch in Perthshire has many strange tales about the mysterious creatures which live in and around the loch. We will talk about some of these in a future video, but for now, I want to tell you a few unusual stories. Stories about the mysterious lights which have been witnessed around the loch for many hundreds of years. Here, on the south side of Loch Rannoch lies the Black Wood of Rannoch, an eerie place by day, but at night, under the silvery light of the moon and stars, the area seems made for tales of the supernatural. It was not far from here, late one night, several hundred years ago. A young man was making his way home along the loch when he became aware of a faint blue light in the trees just ahead of him. Cautiously he approached the area but saw nothing out of the ordinary, until suddenly he found himself surrounded by a funeral procession. One of the poles of the bier carrying the coffin was thrust into his hand, and he was forced to march, slowly, to the faint whispers of Gaelic prayer and the haunting cries of mourners, as he carried the corpse of some unknown stranger along the loch side. His was the side of the coffin nearest the loch, and he had the distinct feeling that the procession was being drawn slowly, inch by inch, towards the black waters. What is more, the other bearers of the ghostly coffin seemed to be laying most of the weight on him, draining his energy with every step, so that he had difficulty staying upright as they slowly edged along the path. Eventually, growing anxious and with one final wearied push, he released his grip on the ghostly bear, which suddenly vanished along with all the other mourners. The man looked down, to find himself knee-deep in the dark loch. Just a few minutes longer, and he would have been surely drowned. Here at this notice board, witnesses can read about the Loch Rannoch, or the Rannoch lights. Another strange phenomenon witnessed many times over the centuries. It can appear almost anywhere, but seems to be most commonly seen here, directly opposite Meardu, the Black Hill, on the northern shore. It is said that when they appear as a spinning ball of blue fire that silently skims the surface of the dark loch. As recently as 1937, Alistair Alpin MacGregor wrote in his book Strange Tales of the Highlands and Islands that the phenomenon had been witnessed just a few years earlier, adding that most of the witnesses' reports state that the light rises from the dark water at precisely the same spot and spins slowly as it glides over the waters. Sometimes it disappears back into the loch again, often at the same spot, just a short distance from where it rose, while at other times it rises from the surface, drifts towards the northern shore and glides effortlessly up the side of Meardu before disappearing into a hollow or cave. The precise nature of this light remains a mystery, but to our ancestors it was connected to the ghostly funeral processions, a phenomenon known as the Drake, death lights, or so-called corpse candles, probably best known around the world as will-o'-the-wisps or jack-o'-lanterns. It was firmly believed that these lights would appear near to the house which would suffer a death in the night, growing larger as they approached the soon-to-be deceased. Glowing with a pale blue light, they would hover over the house for a time, before slowly making their way along the road by which the corpse would soon be taken to the graveyard. Now, before you mock or dismiss these tales, let me finish with a story. The story of an old man who lived in nearby Balmore on a lonely stretch of the loch. This man was famously sceptical of the Drake and often mocked his neighbours for what he called their superstitious beliefs, until late one cold winter's night, as he sat by his fire smoking his pipe and enjoying a dram of whisky, he saw from his window a faint, flickering light approach the cottage. He went to the door, curious to find out who was passing at such a late hour, and as he stepped out onto the public road just in front of his home, the light paused directly in front of him. His neighbours stared in dread as the old man and the apparition stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity. Being of a rational and inquiring nature, he carefully examined the glowing orb, just inches from his face. Slowly, he noticed a shadowy figure begin to take shape at the centre of the disc. This form became more and more noticeable, until at last it began to extend its palms towards the man, who now seemed frozen to the spot. He reported afterwards that he felt his face was being studied, as though some unknown entity was trying to decide if he was the intended victim that night or not. Suddenly, it passed over his head, and the man collapsed to the ground, unharmed, but no longer skeptical. It is said that he lived for many more years, but never again mocked his neighbours. So, if you find yourself on this dark road between the Blackwood of Rannoch and the deep dark waters of the loch late at night, be sure to keep an eye on the loch. You might just spot the Rannoch lights. Just be careful not to join any funeral processions though, lest the next one be your own. If you like this tale and want to know more about Scotland's fascinating folklore and legends, then be sure to hit subscribe.